Nearly 40 years later, Corinne sits in a plain home office in Brussels, where we meet for online meetings. She has been a wealth of support on this book project. Her eyes are kind, her voice confident, but she appears tired, fatigued, drawn out as she approaches her 7th decade on the planet, nearly 4 of them immersed in the world of child killers. Corinne is a world-renowned sex crime and pedophile profiler. She is the European version of Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs. But her expertise lies in the field of child sexual abuse, child serial killers, and child trafficking. She has been studying and working in this profession since the first missing 6-year-old changed her life. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. And we're continuing an ongoing discussion about my latest book. Came out December 5th of 2023, The Devil in Us, a memoir of you and me. So, I skipped over the first 3 chapters, the first section of the book, because it's my personal story. But when you read the whole book, you understand why the personal melds into the public. Because if the things I'm saying about society are true, then you're going to see it in families. And I definitely saw it in my family. And the end of the book is, I guess you could call it in some ways, the remedy at an individual level. I don't think there's any remedy at a collective level other than complete collapse at this point, which is what they seem to be doing. So today we're going to be moving on to the next chapter. We've done the devil. I briefly covered our last free breath, but I reference it as I go through the other chapters. I referenced it in 1947 and I referenced it in the devil. Now we're moving on to a chapter titled The Human Devil. And the human devil is told through the life experience over 4 decades of professional experience in criminal profiling with a specialization in child predators. And it focuses on a woman who in many ways was the inspiration for the book. Like I didn't conceive of writing The Devil in Us, a memoir of you and me, until I met Corinne Hustebot. She lives in Belgium. She's nearly 70 years old. She has credentials too long to list, many degrees. She has participated in courseware both as a student and as a teacher at places like Scotland Yard, Quantico, the FBI, the equivalent institution in France. And I believe the European Union in general she has spoken to. And Corinne provides a window into the world you hear about on those podcasts that focus on the satanic cult in the world. And there is a satanic cult in the world. Now remember, I've already explained Satan. Okay? So let me be very clear about this. The devil's view of the people and groups on this planet who worship him would be similar to Jesus' view of the people on this planet who worship him, which would be abject disgust. We don't get a whole lot right. It's just the nature of being human. We're very easily confused. very easily thrown off track. And very easily misled. That's just the nature of human beings. I want to take a moment to say that these podcasts and contemplating this material for extended periods of time would put most people into a psychiatric institution, or at the very least under heavy sedatives. For those of you who have taken the time to read the book, The Devil in Us, a memoir of you and me, you may have figured out that my upbringing has given me a certain immunity to this stuff. You could say I was raised in it. Not in an overtly satanic home. I was raised in a strict Catholic home. Catholicism, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Al-Anon were the three dominant institutional and ideological presences in my home. That and the demons that attended both my mother and father, because they were both possessed. And possession is not what people think it is. Everywhere we look in this world, we see misdirection. Everywhere we look in this world, we see lies, incompetence, or my favorite and the most prolific of the agents of confusion and despair, people who don't really know what they're saying and are just parroting something they were told to say to occupy a position in an institution. Think of a nurse who, after 3 months of injecting people with the medical regimen that went through the world in 2020, and because that nurse works in a hospital, he or she begins to see the effects. He or she, along with the doctors would be no different either, nor would the pharmacists. They're frontline people. They not only administer the medicine, they're the same place that people come when the negative effects of the medicine set in. What we're going through now is literally a test. It's a spiritual test. What will you do to maintain your status in society? What will you do to keep your home payments going? What will you do to keep your car payments going? What will you do to keep paying your insurance payments on your home and your car? What will you do to make sure the contributions to your 401k or your registered retirement savings plan in Canada remain consistent? Let me be the first to tell you, if you're under 60 now, that money will be taken away from you before you ever get to use it. Okay? And that's because the human devil is in charge now. We come to this world, we get a body, we get a consciousness. Both have to be cared for, nurtured, and kept strong and grown. The body, the physical body, grows until we're about 25 years old, which is the peak of physical maturity. The mind can keep growing until the cellular decay in the body in old age becomes so great that the memory starts to go. All of these things you leave behind. You leave your body and your mind behind in each incarnation. If you were a medical doctor in one incarnation, it doesn't mean you're going to be born automatically knowing how to heal people in the next incarnation. What you retain is the spiritual essence of the incarnation. The closer you got to unconditional love, both in the courage and vulnerability to receive it, because receiving love is very difficult. Very difficult, because you have to completely let down your guard and let that love into you. Now, for those of you who had upbringings similar to mine, it's a lifelong battle to open your heart to love again. But when we do, people like us, we open it completely. This is the benefit of extreme trauma. Now, what I'm going to say next may very well sound like an endorsement for the MK Ultra program, but it isn't. Trauma is undigested consciousness. Trauma and how it affects our consciousness is like indigestion and how it affects our stomach, our intestines, and our bowels. It's a one-to-one correlation. We can't process trauma. Okay? When you have indigestion, you can't or constipation, you can't process the food. Nothing more defines an individual than trauma. It is the unique signature of a lifetime because it's something that we don't have any choice in surviving. You either survive it or you die. Some people do. They give in and they allow themselves to die. Slowly if they do it through addiction. Quickly if they just hang themselves or jump off a bridge. Or blow their heads off with a shotgun the way my grandfather did. But if you can stay the course in a life and survive your trauma without becoming fetishistic, because trauma also produces fetish just like the occult. Trauma produces fetish. So everything that operates here operates through human agency. The life principle and the cellular construction and the deoxyribonucleic acid and the environmental conditions make everything grow. So the DNA of a tulip is the DNA of a tulip. The seed or the bulb of a tulip is going to become a tulip. It can't become anything else because it's been genetically coded to become a tulip. Remember this coding principle. I talked about it last podcast. When you get up to the human incarnations, each life has its own coding, and that coding is a series of experiences that you choose to have to better understand love. Everything we do is to better understand love. Even the darkest incarnations you see on the planet are still part of the spiritual journey to incarnate love, to become love incarnate, to become God incarnate. Love is not what most people think it is. We have so defiled that word in the West. It's almost a pornographic word now. It's almost exclusively been associated with erotic stimulation now. That's not what love is. Love is the essence, the principal characteristic of the divine. And without it, nothing would grow down here. So you've got the DNA, you've got the environment, so let's go back to the tulip bulb. The environmental conditions for the tulip to grow are sun and water, rain. Or in the absence of rain, somebody caring for the bulb in a pot and watering it daily. Same thing for a tree. Same thing for a large mammal. Jaguars do well here in the Talamanca Mountains because there's a lot of wild pigs and other things for them to eat. They're pure carnivores, pure meat eaters. And they regulate the environment better than anything. But if something were to happen to that food supply, the jaguars wouldn't be able to grow up. They would starve. So the environmental conditions for the divine plan, which is love coupled with the deoxyribonucleic acid and the environment, are the conditions by which all things come into existence in this material realm, in this organic sheath. Whether it be the sheath of a plant, an animal, or a human being, they're all just sheaths. They're all just costumes. The devil can act directly upon the world. The devil won't destroy trees. The devil won't destroy rivers. The devil will not prevent a tulip from growing from bulb to leaf to flower. Will not do it. The devil, as well as the divine, to be directly applied into life beyond the growth principle, which is the given, the foundation, requires the agency of intelligent sentient beings. More so the devil. The devil is perfectly fine with creation. The devil would love nature as much as you or me. Love a sunset, love the river, love the trees. Human beings become the agents of the devil. Everything spiritual that is going to act in this dimension has to have physical agency. It has to have boots on the ground. That's why there's such an incredible competition for our attention. That's why I define our inner worlds as the worlds of predation, where we are preyed upon. We sit atop creation, except for very rare circumstances you hear about in the news. Animals and even sharks very rarely attack human beings. We're not preyed upon. We prey upon each other, and we have stuff inside of us that can prey upon us. Are those organic parts of a human being? Like fingers or toes? But inside of us? No. If in all of the podcasts and radio shows I've done, you can truly understand one concept, I will consider all the work I've put into this largely for free, with my own time, to have been worthwhile. And that one concept, that one truth is that our inner lives are real. Stop believing it's your imagination. Stop believing it. I sometimes struggle a little bit with trying to find ways and examples of making this true to you. And as we get into the human devil chapter, which will be one of the more disturbing, as though they haven't already been disturbing, alien human hybrids, the Nazis were never really defeated, Zionism and Nazism are really the same thing at this point in history, and they've joined forces to depopulate. You know, to say that it's going to get darker, how much darker could it get? You see, for me, it's not dark. Or it is, and I'm so used to it, I just don't notice it anymore, and love finds its way to my heart. I'm connected to the divine. I have to work at it, though. I have to meditate and pray every day. Keep my heart open. So I've decided that the best thing I can do at this stage is to tell you a ghost story. This is my best and only ghost story. So here we go. All right, onwards. So I have to set up this ghost story because it's quite a story. And the reason I'm telling you this story is to illustrate, to give you an example of what I mean about heightened sense and the other side always being here, whether we realize it or not. Okay? So this story takes place in about, I can't remember if it was 86 or 87, which would have made me 20 or 21 years old. I was in my first relationship. I was a very late bloomer in terms of romance, physical romance in my life. I was 20 years old when I lost my virginity, which was very uncommon even in the 80s. Most of my friends were between 16 and 18, some 15. Now, in 2024, with the digital media and everything, I don't even want to speculate. But I think it's very important to preserve your sexuality, especially when it commences, because that is going to be the experience that defines your entire romantic life, whether it's negative or positive, whether you're in a loving state or what have you. And I had already started my conscious spiritual life at 17. So my sexuality was a part of my spiritual life, and I wanted to preserve it for the best good and for the greatest spiritual experience in terms of communion with another person. I wanted to be in love. And so I waited. And so I met my first girlfriend when I moved to Toronto. I moved to Toronto when I was 19 years old. I lived in a rooming house in the West End of Toronto in a community called Parkdale, which was notorious for crime, drugs, prostitution, and a prolific number of quite unbalanced people, because there was an outpatient program with one of the largest mental health institutions in Canada at that time. It was called the Queen Street Mental Health Centre. So there were bipolar people and schizophrenic people all over the neighborhood. It was really quite something. If you want to go deeper into this, on my YouTube channel I have a novel I wrote when I was, I think I finished it in 2003. It published in 2007 in Canada. But I have an audio version of it. It's called God is an Economist, and it's right on this YouTube channel. And it captures me at 20 years old perfectly. And this particular girlfriend is referenced in the book. But she's transformed considerably into a different kind of literary character and archetype than who she really was in life, because that's what literary art is about. Now, I need to explain this a little bit. So my girlfriend came from a very good family. She came from a family of doctors. Both of her parents were psychiatrists. And even back then, with the billing under the provincial medical system, each of them was making about $250,000 per year. And so they had a family income of $500,000 a year, and this was all through the late 70s and early 80s and mid 80s. So this was a very well-to-do family. They lived in one of the best parts of Toronto, which was about a 25-30 minute bus ride from where I lived in my little hellhole of a community. This is the community that they lived in. This is an interior of one of the homes there. And they're all multi-million-dollar homes. They actually lived right beside the I think the Iranian consulate is what it was. This isn't their home because I don't want to invade their privacy, but I'm just showing you the neighborhood they lived in. There's the home again. There's another home there. So this is like, I mean, you're talking, that's the area. It was called Grenadier Pond. I mean, you're just dealing with like the highest class of people in Toronto. Now, there's other neighborhoods that are equally nice. There's a home in Grenadier Pond, just overlooking Grenadier Pond. Now, this was an incredible experience for me, and these people in many ways changed my life. One of the reasons I came to love poetry so much and literature was because of the influence of this family. They were an old school, classically educated family. I mean, when you're sitting at the dinner table, you're talking about, Marcel Proust, the French writer. You're talking about James Joyce. You're talking about T.S. Eliot. My girlfriend's father was Irish, and his favorite poet was William Butler Yeats. And so because of their influence on me, I got into a lot of stuff. And it was the perfect time as well, because I had already begun, as I said, my spiritual life. I was already a regular meditator. And all of this poetry and beauty in the Western tradition found a big space inside of me, which had been opened up by my meditative practice. And so I'm eternally grateful for the relationship I had with this woman. I think when I got into journalism school, we broke up. And, I think her father said, as much as they loved books and writers, they had no illusions about somebody wanting to be a writer in their life. And they said, Bruce we think he's really going to do this. He's going to become a writer. It's not a good life for you. And we just kind of went our own ways. But she was a lovely woman. Now, the family had a cottage. Now, if you don't know what a cottage is, I mean, if you're European or North American and you're listening to me, you know what a cottage is. It's a country residence that rich people keep, okay? A place they use only in the summertime. You go water skiing, you go sun tanning, you go canoeing, And their particular cottage was in a place called Georgian Bay. And we'll take a look at that because that's quite beautiful too. There it is. That's the harbor we left from. That was called the Honey Harbor. And this particular cottage area, you can look it up. You can look it up yourself. It's called Georgian Bay. But a lot of the cottages are on their own islands. There's all these like rock islands. And this was the case. There's a classic example of one right there. So this was the case with my girlfriend's family. They had an inherited cottage from my girlfriend's father's side of the family. And even when you went into the grandparents, this was a very established family. I'm not going to give politics, judicial positions, high-ranking people, okay? And they, I used to show up at their house for Sunday dinner. This house that at that time in 85 was worth $1.8 million. Now it would be probably over $7 or $8 million. And I used to show up at their house, and I was working in a very rough bar in my neighborhood. And every Friday and Saturday night, I had to fight with the bouncers and throw people out. And I would show up at this very refined dinner table with swollen knuckles, bruises and cuts on my knuckles, black eyes, and they just did not know why their daughter was with me, right? She was also a year older than me. And but we loved each other at that time as best as people can love that young. Maybe better when you're younger. I don't know. I would like to think that my capacity to love has improved with age. But maybe I'm kidding myself. Maybe I don't have a proper barometer. I don't know. So there was this one time where we were offered the cottage, and it was a long weekend. The Friday was the holiday. I think it might have been what's called the May 24 weekend in Canada. It was fairly early. I think it might have been a bit later than that. It might have been in June or something. It might have been the July 1st, which is Canada Day, which is our July the 4th. Because I remember it was warm enough to swim in the lake. And the dog doesn't eat his food. The cats go after it there. So normally when we went to the cottage, we went with her parents. We may not have gone in the same car. We may have arrived a little bit after them and left a little bit before them. But every time I had been to the cottage, it had been with the whole family. And the cottage was just beautiful. I show you the neighborhood they lived in, so you can just imagine what the cottage was like. I mean, they had their own island. And the cottage, as I said, had been inherited from the grandfather, who was an Ontario Superior Court judge. And so we were offered the cottage, and we went. So this was our first trip to the cottage alone. And let me just tell you, so you come into that harbor I showed you, that's called Honey Harbor in Georgian Bay. And then it was a 45-minute boat ride to the cottage, to the island. And you really have to know where you're going, because this isn't just like one direction across a lake. There's all these little islands and these turns, and if you haven't done it 40 times, you would never get there on your own. So I'll show you a little bit of Georgian Bay. There it is. There are some of the cottages. Let me just get back. Okay, so there's one of the cottages. Did I get that right? Yeah, I guess I did. You've seen this already, but yeah, so there's an island cottage. It was like this, and so you would pull up in your boat just the same way you would pull up to a house in a car. And there's that classic picture of an island cottage. None of those are their cottages, because I can't really violate their privacy. So we got to the cottage, and you got to bring all your own food. right? Because you can't leave food there. You'll bring mice and rats and all kinds of stuff. Even though it's an island, there's all kinds of stuff there. A lot of snakes actually, because they swim right across from island to island. And there's rattlesnakes there in Georgian Bay as well, which is very weird because they get a winter. So you generally go with like garbage bags and a few coolers of food, depending on how long you're going to be there. And we would always raid my girlfriend's parents' freezer, right? I'd be going up there with like the very best food known to human beings, like beautiful steaks and all kinds of stuff, right? I was very clean living back then. I still am for the most part. I mean, I don't drink alcohol. I might smoke a little bit of marijuana from time to time. Okay, I find it not a bad thing once in a while. I think the chronic utility of it is just catastrophic what's happening to Gen Z. I mean, pot and Gen Z are Siamese twins. It's just crazy how much weed these kids smoke, but that's another story. So I was very clean living, and my girlfriend, for the most part, was very clean living as well. Her father was a drinker, Irish, right? Now, he was very curious as to why I didn't drink, being Scottish, but he loved to drink. And my girlfriend, she liked a glass of wine once in a while. So we brought up a bottle of wine as well, I think a bottle of red wine. I remember this trip so clearly. It's just one of those things that never leaves your mind, even though it's like, 29 years ago now. Is it? No, about 36 years ago, this story. 36 years ago. I'm 57 now. It happened when I was 21. So 36 years ago. This is a long time. This is before I got my university degree in journalism or anything. But I knew by that time that I wanted to be a writer. And it was largely a big part of it was the effect of this family on me. And how they taught me to love literature. And I do. I love literature. I love really well-written books. So we get there, and it's about a 2.5, 3-hour drive from where they were in Toronto up to Georgian Bay. About a 3-hour drive, yeah. Quite a distance, right? And if there was traffic, as there always was on a long weekend, it could take 4 or 5 hours. I can't remember how long it took us to get there. I remember coming home was a long time that weekend, but going up, I think it was fairly quick. I think we left, yeah, fairly quick. We got up there in, I don't know, under 4 hours or something. It was a long drive. Like you stop, you get food, that sort of thing, right? And when we got to the cottage, my girlfriend said, "I'm really tired. I'm going to take a nap." And this was very unusual for her. Extremely unusual. She was a high energy person. She was not a napping kind of person. And so she went in and she took a nap after we put away all the food and turned on the electricity. And, you can't put the food into the fridge until the fridge is turned on and chilling food. Otherwise, it's just a cabinet without any refrigeration. I think it was a generator they had, which is how they got the electricity. If it wasn't a generator, the electrical cables went to the islands on the bottom of the lake, just the way the Wi-Fi cables go across the bottom of the ocean, the broadband cables. And while my girlfriend was asleep, I had never been in the cottage alone before. I'd always been with her parents and usually one of her sisters and their boyfriends, or she had 3 sisters. And it was a bit of a strange family. All 4 of the daughters had tried to commit suicide at least once. This darkness has always been in my life. Not so much anymore, but from about birth to about 45 or so, there was a lot of darkness in my life. And if you've read The Devil in Us, A Memoir of You and Me, you'll know why. And if not, get a copy of the book and read it. And I didn't have anything to do, so I went out to the front veranda, which was screened off, but no windows, so the breeze came in, and the breeze was coming in off the lake. And back in those days, I always traveled with a lead pencil and a notebook. And I was always writing stuff down, because remember, I wanted to be a writer, right? So I was always writing things down. And I thought, as I was sitting out on that veranda, I'll write a poem. Why not write a poem? So I wrote a poem. It was pretty bad. I've never been really great at poetry writing. Poetry is a whole other discipline. It's the turning of normal language into magical language is what poetry is. And when done right, it's almost as powerful as scripture. It's first cousin to scripture. The poets in the Western tradition supplement the prophets, in my opinion, when we lived within religious culture anyways. As of modernism and postmodernism, there's clearly no connection anymore. So I sit down and I write this poem, and the last line of the poem, which was written in stanzas, it wasn't quite a sonnet, but there were stanzas. And the last line of the poem was, "I am the wind." So I had the poem written in like a relatively small notebook that was a spiral bind. You can tear the pages out and stuff like that. When you write a lot, you don't buy fancy notebooks like those leather-bound ones they sell at Barnes and Noble. So that's just bait for people who think they're going to be a writer but don't have the discipline. I swear to God, they have found out a way to market everything, even paper. So after writing the poem, I still didn't have another poem in me, and I didn't know what to do. So I started exploring the cottage a bit, which I don't think I'd ever seen the whole cottage, like gone in the master bedroom and everything. And it was a fairly big place, bigger than most people's homes these days. And there were these huge bookshelves. As I've already said, this was an extremely literate family. From the Greek classics through Shakespeare, like just a classically read family, especially the father. And the kind of people we just don't have anymore since technology took over and intelligence is coding and project management, which is not an unintelligent thing to do. And I'm not trying to be a Luddite and say that technology isn't important. Although I am saying in some way that it's not as important as we think it is, but that's a whole other podcast. But what I'm saying is that we've lost something. We've lost something. Every culture has. Every culture has, as we've moved into this technological transformation. Everybody's lost something. So I was going through the bookshelves, because they went over a few walls. And there was a lot of light coming into this cottage. They had these big bay windows, and just light would flood in. It was just so beautiful. Not as beautiful as where I live now, but pretty beautiful. And so I was just glancing at book bindings, maybe thinking of picking something out to read. My girlfriend's father had recommended Philip Roth to me, which I was very grateful for. Philip Roth was a great 20th century writer. If you haven't read it, you should read American Pastoral. They made a movie, but it doesn't come close. American Pastoral is a good book. John Updike, so I read The Witches of Eastwick, a bunch of Rogers' version, a bunch of John Updike, John Irving, Cider House Rules, The World According to Garp. These were popular pop literature of the 80s, okay? Meanwhile, The real heavyweight of that generation was undiscovered yet. He wouldn't be discovered till he was almost 60. And that's, of course, Cormac McCarthy, who is so far beyond those guys. It's unbelievable in his ability to marshal language. And the topics and themes he deals with are just, they're biblical. They're biblical. They're prophetic. Poetry introduced me to all these poets. And then I went out and found my own favorite poets. I'd say probably, you know about Wallace Stevens, but maybe I will share a little bit of Ted Hughes with you.
Nobody was quite sure how Crow was born. Different stories were told. Out under the sun stands a body. It is growth of the solid world. It is part of the world's earthen wall. The earth's plants, such as the genitals and the flowerless navel, live in its crevices. Also, some of earth's creatures, such as the mouth. All are rooted in earth or eat earth earthy, thickening the wall. Only there is a doorway in the wall, a black doorway, the eye's pupil. Through that doorway came Crow. Flying from sun to sun, he found this home. Looking close in the evil mirror, Crow saw mistings of civilizations, towers, gardens, battles. He wiped the glass. But there came mistings of skyscrapers, webs of cities, steaming the glass. He wiped it. There came spread of swamp ferns fronded on the mistings, a trickling spider. He wiped the glass. He peered for a glimpse of the usual grinning face. But it was no good. He was breathing too heavy and too hot, and space was too cold. And here came the misty ballerinas, the burning gulf, the hanging gardens. It was eerie. Crow looked at the world, mountainously heaped. He looked at the heavens littering away beyond every limit. He looked in front of his feet at the little stream, chugging on like an auxiliary motor, fastened to this infinite engine. He imagined the whole engineering of its assembly, repairs and maintenance, and felt helpless. He plucked grass heads and gazed into them, waiting for first instructions. He studied a stone from a stream. He found a dead mole, and slowly he took it apart, then stared at the gobbets, feeling helpless. He walked, letting the translucent, starry spaces blow in his ear cluelessly. Yet the prophecy inside him, like a grimace, was, I will measure it all and own it all, and I will be inside it as inside my own laughter, and not staring out at it through walls of my eyes' cold quarantine, from a buried cell of bloody blackness. This prophecy was inside him, like a steel spring slowly rending the vital fibers. Crow, written...
And that's Crow by Ted Hughes. Probably my first favorite poet. Just because it was so visceral, and my life up until that point when I was 21 had been extremely visceral. You know, life on the streets and living in very bad neighborhoods and stuff like that. So of course I would gravitate toward that kind of poetry. But as I was going through the bookshelf, I noticed one book, and it was huge. I mean, the binding must have been about this tall, like about 14 inches, over a foot, and it was about that thick. It was like 4 or 5 inches thick. It was like a telephone book. But it had this beautiful leather binding as though it had been hand bound. And the paper was a little thicker than normal paper. And it wasn't lined. Okay? So it was like the old paper you would write on with ink and a feather. And because of its unusual characteristics, I pulled the book out, curious as to what it could be. And I opened it up, and it turned out that it was a registry of sorts of people who had visited the cottage. And I mean, it went back to like 1909, like a long time. And I started to get like fascinated reading this living family history of all the people who had visited. And people would write little notes, and some people would write like a half page about what they experienced at the cottage, because it's a very beautiful and meditative place. And I was flipping through it, and I came to one section of the book that was the only page in the book that had this. There was another piece of paper stapled onto the paper in the book. And the stapled piece of paper was a clipping from the Toronto Star, which is the largest daily newspaper in Canada. And it was an obituary. And it was an obituary for a 17-year-old boy in Toronto who had died, and the obituary was written and published by the boy's father. I don't know why the Toronto Star published it. I don't know if I don't know. I think you can pay to have your obituary put in the newspaper, right? But you can write them, so he wrote his own obituary. But he wrote at the end of this obituary a few poetic lines, not lines of poetry where they were separated, like a line of poetry, but more poetic. And I think he was trying to describe, where his son was in death. And the last line of the obituary was, "I am the wind." A little chill went up my back. But you can't get too crazy with all this coincidence stuff. And for those of you who've watched the podcast called What is a Synchronicity, they happen when they happen. Don't be looking for them. In fact, if you're looking for them, you're never going to find them. So this was a bizarre and strange coincidence. I went, wow, that is weird. Pulled the poem out again, read it again. I went, that is really weird. Okay? And then at that point, I tore the paper out of my notebook and folded the poem up and put it in my pocket. Can't exactly remember why I did that, but I did. Some more time went by, and I have to finish with the registry. Now, on the opposite facing page, so on the left page, my girlfriend's father had written into the book. And on the right page was the stapled obituary from the Toronto Star. And my girlfriend's father wrote something for his stepson. So they had a stepson. Now remember, both of the parents were psychiatrists. They had 4 daughters. And my girlfriend's father himself had been adopted by this family, the Superior Court judge. And so he had taken this foster child into the home when he was, I think, 14 years old, and he had already bounced around in a dozen foster homes. Really banged up kid, like walked around with a knife. These are the stories I was told. Very, very rough kid. And the parents, my girlfriend's parents, they had tried to help this boy. But he had left their home when he was 17 and killed himself on a highway in the British Columbia interior. And if you don't know the British Columbia interior, it's all mountains. It's all the Rocky Mountains, and the highway goes through the mountains, and he drove right off a cliff. And his girlfriend was with him, and they both got killed, and nobody knows for sure if it was a suicide or an accident. So I thought, gee, that's weird too, right? Put the registry back on the shelf. My girlfriend woke up a little while later. We made dinner. No TV up there, no radio. So all you do is you either quietly read together or you talk, and we talked. Went to bed, woke up the next day. So we arrived on the Friday. It was a long weekend, and the Friday was the holiday. Woke up Saturday, had a breakfast, completely normal day, went out boating for a while. I like to go to a deep part of the lake and jump off the back of the boat when it's stopped and just swim in the deep part of the lake. It's very beautiful. And so we did this kind of physical activity all day, lay down on beach towels on the end of the dock, and the dock was about 100 feet of wood, long dock. And went back up as the sun was going down, which probably would have been about 8:30, 9 o'clock then, if it was July, 9:30 maybe. And, we had a nice dinner again. We brought some really good food with us, which we didn't pay for. We just took from my girlfriend's father's freezer, right, his parents' freezer. And we made a fire. There was a fireplace, and we opened the bottle of red wine. And we sat in front of the fire on the floor with pillows, and we had a glass of wine, and we just talked. This was a very, I don't know how to explain it, a lot of talking in this relationship. We used to talk a lot, and I was reading a lot back then, so I always wanted to talk about what I was reading. And my girlfriend too, she was very educated, very literate. And at the time, she was in her third year of getting a psychology degree. And it got to be around 11:30 at night. And my girlfriend said, I have to go back down to the dock. I left my hair shampoo there. And I said, well, just leave it till the morning. She said, no, the wind could blow it off. I said, it's too dangerous, even with a flashlight. It's like 150 meters down these stone steps and then out to the dock, and you never know what you're going to encounter, right? A rattlesnake or whatever. There's bears there. They swim from island to island, the black bears. I said, just leave it till the next day. She said, no, man, this is like an $18 bottle of hair shampoo. This girlfriend had a hair fetish. Okay, like in 1985, she paid $80 for a haircut. I mean, that would be like $300 today, right? So she really took care of her hair. And so she said, I'm going down to get the conditioner. So she grabbed a flashlight, went out the front door and out the veranda door, and just kind of disappeared into the night. And she was gone a long time, like 15 or 20 minutes, and I went out once or twice just to the front, but because it's pitch black, right? Except for, it wasn't pitch black, but I'll get to that in a second. But there was only the one flashlight, and I couldn't follow her because the way down to the dock was too precarious without light. You could easily sprain an ankle, even being a young man at 20, 21 years old. So I went back in, but when I went out, I noticed that there was just the most brilliant northern lights. Like, it had to be one of the most extraordinary northern lights I'd ever seen in my life. And I've only seen the northern lights really like that 2 or 3 times in my life. Once was in Banff, Alberta, and it was just kind of remarkable. So after about 20 minutes, my girlfriend comes up and she's a combination of anxious, frightened, and angry. And she says the first thing out of her mouth is, "Don't ever do that to me again." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Don't ever try to scare me like that again." I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "You didn't follow me down?" I said, "No." She said, "You didn't follow me down?" I said, "No." And this went on like 3, 4 times. She literally did not believe me. I finally had to sort of take her by the shoulders and say, "Look, I have not left the cottage except to go out the front door and look at the northern lights. I did not go a football field and a half after you." And I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, when I was down on the dock, I had this incredible feeling that I was being watched." Now remember, we're the only ones on the island. It's not like you're in a city or something, right? And she says, "I turned around and I said, 'Stop it,' 2, 3 times to the bushes, the trees, the pine trees on the island, because I thought you were hiding in them. I said, 'Did you hear anything?' And she said, 'No, not really.' I said, 'This was just a feeling?' She said, 'Yeah, it was just a feeling.' And I said, 'Well, why are you so certain I was down there?' She said, 'Somebody was down there.' I said, 'Well, you said you didn't hear anything. This is all based on a feeling. You've had a glass of wine. Do you think maybe you just got a little spooked under the northern lights or something?' She said, 'No, somebody was down there.' I said, 'Okay.' We get past all this. She believes me, but she's perplexed as to what happened. She's got the hair conditioner, of course, the $18 bottle of hair conditioner. And sit down in front of the fire again. We start to talk. Change the topic from what happened down on the dock. And talk about something else for about 10 or 15 minutes. Then she circles back to the dock. And she says, "When you didn't answer me when I called your name down at the dock and I said, 'Stop doing that, Bruce, Bruce, stop doing that,' she said, 'I had this incredibly clear thought in my mind.' And I said, 'What was the thought?' And she said, 'I thought it was Michael.' Now, Michael was the stepson who killed himself in British Columbia. Okay? Drove off the cliff. And I looked at my girlfriend and I said, that's really weird that you bring that up." Then I told her my whole story about the Friday, sitting on the front veranda, writing the poem, the last line, "I am the wind," and then finding the same line in the obituary from the Toronto Star adjacent to the page where my girlfriend's father had written his goodbye to his son. And the kid in the Toronto Star and my girlfriend's father, their sons, my girlfriend's stepbrother, they had both died on the same day. And they were both 17 years old. Told my girlfriend the whole story. She says, "That's really weird." Now, I've been meditating about 3.5, 4 years by this time. So I'm fairly sensitive. And I said, this is just a really bizarre coincidence that she would bring up this stepbrother and that I would see the thing in the registry, which I'd never seen before. I knew about the stepbrother. I'd been going out with this girl for about 1.5 years at the time. I'd heard the stories. I knew he died. I didn't know how he died, really. Just a car accident in British Columbia. But I wasn't told he drove off a cliff or anything like that. And we just kind of left it at that and went to bed. Like, wow, that's weird. Went to bed, fell asleep fairly easily, okay? Now, in the morning at the crack of dawn, like just as the sun was rising, I was sleeping on my right side, just sort of like this, with my head on the pillow. And I had this dream. And without any bodily motion, not a twitch of my shoulder, nothing, I simply opened my eyes on the pillow. The dream woke me up. At the exact moment I opened my eyes, my girlfriend was sleeping on her left shoulder like this, and we were facing each other, facing into the center of the bed, and our faces were about 6 or 8 inches apart, but our bodies weren't touching. I open my eyes, she opens her eyes, exact same time. I say, wow, I just had the weirdest dream. She said, me too. I tell her my dream. She tells me her dream. Now, the actual events of the dreams were different, but the energy of the dreams was the same. And it was this brother, Michael, communicating with us. I don't want to go into the dream details. It'll just be take my word for it. Okay? He was a little bit disturbed, this young man. And we both had these disturbing dreams. Okay? And woke up at the exact same millisecond. Opened our eyes at the exact same time. Exact same millisecond. You can't make this stuff up. I dare you to even try. So after telling each other our dreams, we put the whole weekend, from Friday with the poem, me seeing the registry, Saturday night with the hair shampoo, the Northern Lights, her sensing Michael down at the dock, and then the synchronous dreams waking us both up. And I mean, this was like maybe like 4:45 in the morning. I mean, the sun was just coming up. Just coming up. So if you look at one side of the sky, you could still see stars. You look at the other side of the sky, you just see the sunlight coming over the crest. We're on this island in the middle of nowhere in Georgian Bay. So we start to get a little freaked out. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, this is a bit spooky. I think this kid is here. Right? I think he's here. I make my case to my girlfriend. She says, well, what do you want to do? I said, let's just go. She said, well, no, it's our only long weekend here. Nothing happened yesterday during the day. The poem wasn't that big a thing. Let's, spend at least half or 3/4 of the day here today. And that's what we did. We went swimming, forgot all about it, that sort of stuff. So then later on, I think we ended up leaving about 3:30 in the afternoon. But the traffic going back to that Toronto that Sunday on the long weekend was unbelievable. It took us, we stopped for dinner and everything. We stopped at a restaurant. We stopped 2 or 3 times for, beverages and snacks. You know how young people are in their 20s. But it took us, wow, I'd say, I don't know, 7.5, 8 hours to get back to Toronto. There was a lot of traffic in the city too. I think we stopped at a museum as well. What's called the Group of Seven Museum, which were these painters in Canada called the Oil on Canvas. They mainly painted that area, Georgian Bay. But the traffic was so bad and so slow. We did all these little stops and continued our long weekend vacation. And we ended up getting back to the family house at about 11:30 at night. And there were a bunch of cars in front of the house. More than usually are there, so we know there's guests. Now, in my girlfriend's family, anytime something happened from Monday to Saturday, it was whatever it was, a birthday, an anniversary, whatever it was, the celebration in the family was always pushed to the first Sunday. Okay? So we didn't know what it was. And my girlfriend's going, oh my God, what have we forgotten? What have I forgotten? Who did I forget to get a gift for and everything? We go in the house. All her sisters are there with her boyfriends. And they're all off at different universities and stuff, right? And they're all sitting around the dining room table. And my girlfriend walks in, I walk in behind her. And my girlfriend says, "What is it? What did I forget?" And her father goes, "Oh, I can't believe you'd forget me." And she says, "What?" And he says, "Well, we're celebrating Father's Day." And my girlfriend goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry." So I guess this was June, because Father's Day is always in June. And the whole weekend is starting to cook in my head. And we talked about it a lot in the drive home. Like, did this really happen? Is this how people go crazy? Are we going crazy? And I'm like, having read all the spiritual literature I've read already, by the time I'm 20, 21, I'm going, no, I think this stuff happens all the time. It's never happened to me. That had never happened to me before. But, so her father could, I don't know, kind of sense something on me. I didn't talk to this guy much alone. I mean, he scared the living bejesus out of me. He was literally one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. He's a psychiatrist. He could see right through you. And I was just like this street urchin, knocking people out in a bar in the West End of Toronto and dating his favorite daughter. So, grab a piece of cake, eat a piece of cake. We've already ate so much that I don't want any food. There's still food in the kitchen. They can bring out a plate of food. It's about 11:30 at night. A bunch of small talk is being made. I start to feel very uncomfortable. And I leave the dining room and I go into the kitchen, and it's a push swing door. And I sit down at the kitchen table by myself. 30 seconds after I'm in the kitchen, her father comes in, the doctor, the psychiatrist. And he's about, at that time, he was about the age I am now, about 57. He's passed now, but it doesn't say anything to me. Except, "Did you enjoy your weekend?" I said, "Well, it was quite something." And he's doing stuff, like he's going to the kitchen. He's not just stopping, looking right at me and talking. But I get the sense that he's deliberately trying to make this conversation seem casual, but it's not casual for him. He's picked something up. So something in me, and this is the craziest thing, I pull that poem I wrote out of my pocket. And I said, "This is for you, for Father's Day." And I didn't even know why I said that. It was like I was possessed, okay? I had no rational reason. I guess part of me wanted to tell him what happened at the cottage, but I thought the guy would think I was crazy. Or worse, that I concocted the whole story. That I found the stuff in the registry. I didn't know what to make of this. Didn't know what to make of it at all. So he takes the poem, reads it. It's just me and him in the kitchen. We got home about 11:30 p.m. from the cottage. He says, first thing he says, "This last line is interesting." Immediately I know he knows that it's from the obituary and from his entry into the registry at the cottage. And if you've ever seen like one of those TV shows or one of those movies where the accused just sort of collapses under the slightest pressure, that was me at 20 or 21. And I just did not want to lie to this guy, because first of all, I loved his daughter and I didn't want to disrespect him. And secondly, I didn't think I could get away with it. So I immediately say, "I don't think I wrote that poem. I think it was written through me." Comes over, he sits down at the kitchen table, just me and him. Okay? And I've never really had a one-on-one conversation with this guy. I've been in cars with him, my girlfriend and me. He and I have spoken, all kinds of stuff. We've done the cottage drive with him, 3 hours with no traffic. I've spoken to him, but never one-on-one. And he says, "Is there anything you want to tell me, Bruce?" And I just spill the whole story. And I don't know, it takes me a little while to tell him. I'm like stumbling over my words, try not to sound like an idiot, and just thinking this guy's going to think I'm crazy. He's a psychiatrist. But he was actually, as I look back on him now, he was fairly spiritually awakened too. I mean, not a clairvoyant or anything like that, but he was no stranger to these things. I don't know what he saw in his psychiatry practice or anything like that, but I tell him the whole story, and he's just sitting there, kind of like taking it all in. And then the kitchen door swings open. It's been, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, me telling him the whole story. It's my girlfriend. I look at her, I say, I told him everything. She looks at her father looks at her, and she says her version of it. This happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And there's this weird silence. He's just sitting there taking it all in. My girlfriend gives, her experience getting the shampoo or the hair conditioner, everything. The dream, us waking up at the same millisecond, same dream penetration from a disembodied entity. And my girlfriend's father collected clocks. And I mean like, I have some pictures to show you here. I mean like clocks like this. He must have had 30 or 40 of them in the house. And they were all set to chime, I think, at noon and midnight. And as we're sitting there at the kitchen table with everybody else still in the dining room at the party, all of the alarm clocks go off at the same time. Dong, dong, like all through this multi-million-dollar house. And the last sort of open question from my girlfriend and myself to her father was, do you believe this? All the clocks go off. He says, yeah, I believe you. And he looks at his daughter, he goes, do you know what day it is? And she says, well, yeah, it's Father's Day. She said, no, besides that. And she says, no. And he says, your stepbrother Michael died 7 years ago today, to the day, as of the chiming of the clocks. That's my ghost story. So why tell it? Why, in the midst of this Devil in Us, a memoir of you and me, do I offer up a personal story like this from when I was 20 or 21? Well, for a number of reasons. Number one, it's important that you understand when I speak about spiritual matters, I have a lot of experience in this multidimensional stuff. I can't do anything at will, okay? I cannot do anything at will. If you said, Bruce, can you contact my dead brother? No. Bruce, can you go and exercise this house? Well, I could go and sleep there and nothing would bother me, but I can't guarantee I can push whatever is in there out. I don't have any abilities. Like you see all these new age people and, selling their abilities, whatever they are, Akashic reading records or this or that, and all of this pseudo-shamanistic nonsense that people are just dumping into the marketplace now, ayahuasca retreats and all of this crap. But what I do have is hundreds and thousands of spiritual, paranormal, and metaphysical experiences as an affectation of a 40-year practice of meditating. And the importance of this ghost story is nothing moved. Nothing was audible. Nothing broke the third dimension. There's some kind of new AI they got going on Max there. If I do this, I get a thumbs up, but not always. Yeah, there it is. So there was nothing seen, nothing heard, nothing moved. Like when you watch these horror movies, there's always like bed shaking. That's not how the other side works. It's very, very subtle. If we were different people and we were heavy drinkers or potheads and we went to the cottage and we were high all weekend or drunk all weekend, we would have missed this 7-year window where he visited the earth. And the cottage, when he was with my girlfriend's family, and he was only with them for 3 or 4 years, from 13 or 14 to 17, I guess close to 18. But we would have missed all this incredible experience of interacting with the other side. And it was all done through our consciousness, through our feelings, our senses, our sixth sense, and attention to what's going on inside of us. Okay? This is the importance of spiritual practice. This is the importance of meditation. Quieting yourself down. Okay? There's all this stuff going around us all the time. And people just miss it. They can't tune into it. They can't get the knob on the right frequency. But if you become mindful and aware, you will realize in very short time that we are living with multiple dimensions overlapping each other. This is the spiritual reality of being on this earth in the 3D. Okay? So we're going to be moving into the human devil chapter. It's very disturbing, like 1947 wasn't, but 1947 was more like ancient aliens kind of crap. And, you know, the human devil is a very interesting chapter. We're going to go into the culture of Satanism, which is real. Comet pizza, all of these pedophilia, child sacrifice, everything. And we're going to go into it through the eyes of Corinne Hustebot, the woman in Belgium, okay? But today, I just thought I would veer off a little bit and do something a little bit different and let you who follow me, however small the numbers are, get to know me a little bit better so that you know I'm not just some goof talking a bunch of shit to you, okay? I know what I'm talking about. Probably more of what's going on in this world has been given to me than most people, for whatever reasons I don't know. Maybe because I'm a communicator, because I write books, I don't know. But aside from the people engineering what's going on, this genocide, this cull of the human race, because it's not just Gaza that's being genocided. It's going on in Canada and the United States right now as well. Okay, stop focusing on Gaza. You've got millions of military-age men coming over your border unchecked, hundreds of billions of dollars being spent by the U.S. Treasury and given to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, to move these people around the country into strategic positions. Your food supply has been attacked. Your dollar is about to collapse. You're in worse shape than Palestine right now. Stop worrying about Palestine. Okay? That's it for today, and we'll get back to The Devil and Us tomorrow probably. Talamanca Review. Bruce McDonald. Peace out.